and gentlemen, and welcome to our conference here at the Anzac Memorial. My name is Robert Muscat. I'm the President of the Military History Society of New South Wales. We as an organisation go back to 1968, and since that time we've been a forum for discussion of general military history and heritage in Sydney, New South Wales, and across all of New South Wales. We offer monthly lectures here at the Memorial on the first Saturday of each month. And I know we have a lot of members here and visitors who have joined us on those particular occasions. We're very happy to promote the study, the research and the efforts to foster the public interest in the field of military history. Our patron of the Society is Major General Honourable Justice Paul Brereton, who is here this morning. He'll be our first speaker, and I will introduce him in a short while. And we thank him for his continual support in ensuring that this Society will continue in the future. Today is a very important day. It's our first conference for many years. And not only it's important for us as a society, it's also important because I know in the room today we have a lot of representatives from each of the military history associations across Sydney and New South Wales. We have Ian McIntyre and some of his members from the Civil War Roundtable. We have members from the Western Front Association, the families and friends of the first AIF, Military Historical Society of Australia, and I also understand we have members from the Miranda Military History Group. A day like today means that we can all come together, like-minded people, and acknowledge our military history and our heritage and those who have served our country. So it's a really important day for us. Sorry, this technology. Actually, I love it. Yeah, I think so too. It's my whiteboard. I'm actually a principal I wear the other hat in my school principal, so I like the old whiteboard sometimes, get rid of the technology. The theme that we chose for this conference, as you can see on the screen, is New South Wales at War. And we did so because we wanted to highlight different aspects of the New South Welshmen and women who fought overseas and also those who served in country. People from New South Wales have volunteered since the 1860s. There was a small contingent that went over to fight for the British Army and New Zealand units in the New Zealand Wars in the 1860s. The men who volunteered to go over to the Boxer Rebellion and the Sudan campaign. We had members who volunteered to fight in the Boer War. And then after Federation, we had members who volunteered to fight in the first and the second AIF, in Korea, Vietnam, Malaya, and now in our current form in Afghanistan, Iraq, and UN operations. So New South Wales has been well represented as a volunteering force since the 1860s. And today we are acknowledging that and recognising those men and women who volunteered to serve under a particular flag, whether that be pre or post-Federation, and to support the military and military operations inside Australia and outside. And that's what today's about. And as you can see on the screen, we have a number of speakers here. Three of our four speakers, Tom Lewis, David Cameron and Michael Madden, will also be signing their books, which is on my right. and that'll be done during our breaks. So if you wish to purchase and have your book signed, then those speakers will be available for that to happen. Books can be purchased either in cash or electronic means. So that'll happen during morning tea and lunch. As part of our day, I'll just run through that with you. As you can see, we have our speakers. We have morning tea at 10. Lunch is at 12:30. Now, concurrently with lunch, we're running tours. So I do need your cooperation for this to happen smoothly. On your name tag, there is a number. That number represents which group you will join. There are 4 groups. Groups 1 and 2 will be leaving straight away at 12:30, and we have members of the memorial who will take you on the back rooms tour. Each tour will last approximately 30 minutes. Don't worry, we will have lunch for you when you return. Groups 3 and 4 will then be the second 2 groups to go approximately around 1 o'clock, just a little bit after 1. Okay, so there'll be people wearing lanyards like this. These are the guys who are working with me. They're council members, they're also organising committee members. They're here to help you have a pleasurable day today. Now, some other housekeeping matters. If you haven't found them yet, the toilets are outside the auditorium and to my left, down the end of the corridor, males and females. If there has to be an evacuation, there will be a signal that will be sound throughout the building, and if you could make your way up the ramp, and there's an evacuation point just outside in the park. Now, coffee cups and water for glasses. We don't have a hospitality team running behind there doing the cleaning up. That's going to be us wearing these lanyards. So I would appreciate it if you are using a cup, could you hold on to it? If you haven't, that's okay. We're going to be doing some cleaning throughout the day. But just be aware we don't have a catering team looking after that, so I would appreciate your support with that too. Morning tea and lunch is provided. There are 2 stations, so there's one on my left, one on my right, and lunch will come out from the kitchens, and morning tea will come out just prior to the start of those sessions. Now, with lunch and morning tea, and again, this is the memorial's instructions, that no food or tea or coffee is to be had outside of this auditorium. Okay, so I know it's going to be a bit tight, so what we're going to do for lunch, we'll stack some of the chairs to the side to give you a little bit more standing room, but we're not doing that for morning tea only because it's a small period of time. So I do appreciate you just finding your little spot and maybe staying at one spot and not moving around. It will cause a little bit more confusion. So again, just no food or tea or coffee outside of the auditorium. If you would like, you can make it wander outside. That's not a problem. The doors will be open. The Russi Library, which is located just on the other side of the memorial, that'll be open during morning tea and lunch. And Paul Irving, who's the library manager, and Ron Lyons, who's the vice president of the society, will be there to answer any of your questions, but also give you a bit of a rundown of the Russi Library. The Ode will occur at 11, and we will be stopping for the Ode. Just to let you know that too. And the last thing, if you could make sure that your phones are off or on silent, please. Now, if there's any other questions, anything that I've missed, remember anyone wearing this lanyard can answer any of your questions or give you that support. privilege of introducing our patron, who's also our first speaker this morning, Major General Honorary Justice Paul Brereton. Paul is an Army Reservist who holds the rank of Major General. He has served as Second in Command, Sydney University Regiment, Commanding Officer, 4th 3rd Battalion, Royal New South Wales Regiment, Chief Staff of the 5th Brigade, Assistant Chief of the Land Headquarters and Commander of the 5th Brigade. And from 2011 to 2013, he was Head of Cadet Reserve and Employee Support Division. He holds the honorary appointments as Colonel Commandant of the Royal New South Wales Regiment and the University of New South Wales Regiment. He has sat as member of the Defence Force Discipline Appeals Tribunal and acted as Assistant Inspector General of the Australian Defence Force. Justice Brereton was honoured with membership of the Order of Australia Military Division in 2010 and has received the Reserve Force Decoration in 1995. We put our hands together to welcome.
Thanks, Rob. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see such a tremendous crowd here and to see among you quite a few familiar faces, both from the Society and from elsewhere. I'm conspicuous amongst today's presenters by the fact that I don't have a book to offer. Well, I do, but I didn't think the 10th edition of Nye's Conflict of Laws would really appeal to this audience, so I didn't bring it along. But I do have an alternative proposition. The 2 volumes of Gordon Maitland's Battle History of the Royal New South Wales Regiment or Gordon's Tales of Valour are available on application to Graham Davis, who is sitting just there in the audience, and I will gladly undertake to autograph any that any of you choose to purchase. The proceeds go to the Royal New South Wales Regiment. Deep thinkers was a term used in the slang of the Australian Imperial Force to describe reinforcements who arrived after the first contingents. They took their time to volunteer. They thought about it before they did so. After the first 4 infantry brigades and the Light Horse Brigade of the AIF embarked from Australia in November and December 1914, satisfying the Commonwealth's initial commitment of 20,000 people for the war effort, enlistments continued. The official historian, Charles Bean, described these later enlistments thus: the great tide of enlistment, which set in after the landing, had not indeed yet commenced. But since the sailing of the early contingents, there had been steadily enrolled a somewhat different class of men from that which had first rushed to the recruiting offices. They were men who perceived that the war was likely to be longer and more difficult than had at first appeared. Men who waited to settle their family or business affairs before considering themselves free to enlist. Men who had begun to realise that if the war was to be won, each individual citizen must put his shoulder to the wheel. A high proportion volunteered, not so much from impetuosity of spirit, as because of a reasoned patriotism. The newspapers, in the effort to encourage enlistment, pointed out that these men were perhaps more truly representative of Australia than the adventurous 1st Division, and that they were impressing all beholders as the finest troops yet raised in the Commonwealth. Men of the 1st Division, reduced, war-worn, sick in their trenches at Anzac, read such eulogies with sardonic comments, and at once christened these future arrivals as the dinkum, that is the genuine Australians. With far larger numbers enlisting than would be required for mere reinforcements, the Commonwealth made an offer to Great Britain to supply additional units to a strength of 10,000. In accepting, the British government asked that as large a proportion as possible be infantry. On the 2nd of February 2015, therefore, the Commonwealth notified London that the new force would comprise 2 infantry brigades, the 5th and the 6th, one night horse brigade. Later, a 3rd Infantry Brigade, the 7th, was added. The 5th Brigade was to be raised from New South Wales, the 6th from Victoria, and the 7th from the other states. In due course, those 3 brigades would come to form the 2nd Division. And so the 5th Australian Infantry Brigade and the 17th, 18th, 19th and 20th Australian Infantry Battalions which comprised it were raised at Holsworthy in February and March 1915. In the time available to me, I can give only an overview of its history and performance, focusing on some highlights and heroes. For it, I have many sources: Bean's official history, Maitland's Tales of Valour, particularly for the Victoria Crosses, and Volume 1 of his battle history, the Australian War Memorial entries for each of the 4 battalions, and for biographies of the commanders. Keith Mackenzie's history of the 17th Battalion, Peter McGuinness's Boldly and Bravely, the history of the 19th Battalion, and David Cameron's Gallipoli, the final battles, and he's here to correct me when I get what happened at Hill 60 wrong. I'd particularly like to mention a book of which I was unaware until last year, but which I found particularly useful: Wayne Matthews and David Wilson's Fighting 19th, another history of the 19th Battalion. Although focused on the 19th Battalion, it provides a pretty good coverage of the entire brigade. I think David Wilson spoke to the Society last year also. But I'm particularly indebted to that work for the maps which I have used in this presentation. Selected to command the 5th Brigade was Colonel William Holmes. The son of one Captain William Holmes, the Chief Clerk at New South Wales Military Force Headquarters, Colonel Holmes grew up at Victoria Barracks and was educated at Paddington Public School. From 1895 he was Secretary of the Metropolitan Board of Water Supply and Sewerage and oversaw its great expansion, including the construction of the Cataract, Cordo and Avon dams south of Sydney, which continue to be an important part of the Sydney water supply today. At the age of 10, Holmes joined the 1st Infantry Regiment of the New South Wales Military Forces as a bugler. Thereafter he served in every enlisted rank until he was commissioned 2nd Lieutenant in 1886, promoted Lieutenant in 1890, Captain in 1894 and Major in 1900. In 1899 he volunteered for service for South Africa, accepting a reduction to Lieutenant to do so. In South Africa he was given command of East Squadron, the 1st New South Wales Mounted Rifles, and promoted Captain. He was wounded in action at Diamond Hill in June 1900 and mentioned in dispatches, promoted to Brereton Lieutenant Colonel, awarded the Distinguished Service Order and invalided at home in August 1900. From 1902 to 1911, concurrently with his duties as Secretary of the Water Board, Holmes commanded the 1st Australian Infantry. In 1912 he was promoted Colonel and appointed to command the 6th Infantry Brigade. In August 1914, shortly after war broke out, he was selected to command the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force to occupy German possessions in the Southwest Pacific. Under his command, the AIF and MEF was enlisted, equipped and dispatched in 10 days. The German governor surrendered to Colonel Holmes on 17 September 1914 and Holmes became Administrator of New Guinea. He relinquished that post in January 1915, returning to Australia, where his appointment to the AN and MEF was terminated on the 6th of February 1915. On the 16th of March, he was appointed to the AIF as commander of the newly formed 5th Brigade, with the rank of Colonel. Like him, a substantial proportion of those recruited to the brigade were veterans of the AN and MEF. On the 24th of April, the 5th Brigade marched through Sydney in a farewell parade before its departure, led by the Brigade Band, which we'll see later in a different environment, to the tune of the Brigade March, marching through Georgia. A crowd of 200,000 watched. The salute was taken in Macquarie Street by the Governor-General. Between the 12th of May and the 25th of June, the Brigade departed Australia for Egypt, where it was assigned to the 2nd Division, along with the 6th Brigade and later the 7th Brigade. That division was then being raised. The brigade was complete and camped at Aerodrome Camp near Heliopolis by 23 July 1915. On the 3rd of August, colour patches were issued. The 5th Brigade's patch was the Green Diamond. The battalion's diamonds were in the standard numerical sequence: black over green, purple over green, brown over green, and white over green. The brigade trained in Egypt until mid-August. By then, the need for reinforcements at Gallipoli, where the 1st Division and the New Zealand and Australian Division had been engaged for 4 months since the 25th of April, was such that although the 2nd Division was only partially trained, the 5th Brigade was sent to Anzac Cove, where they arrived between 9 and 22 August. The history of the 17th Battalion, Mackenzie, records: stabbing flashes and the rattle of small arms indicated the direction of the trenches. Away on the right, a warship, with the aid of its powerful searchlights, was shelling the Turkish trenches south of Anzac. The new arrivals could plainly see the bursting shells, followed several seconds later by the sound of the explosions. On the left, 3 hospital ships were anchored, their hulls picked out in white and green lights, and their large Geneva crosses framed in blazing red, forming a fascinating contrast to the grim setting of the main scene. Of these new arrivals at Gallipoli, Bean wrote, "These troops came to the tried and somewhat haggard garrison of Anzac like a fresh breeze from the Australian bush. Great big cheery fellows whom it did your heart good to see," wrote an Australian. "Quite the biggest lot I've ever seen." As these men, with well-rounded cheeks and strong limbs, filed past the heights of which in Australia they had heard so much, they quietly but eagerly questioned other wayfarers as to the situation. They had not yet acquired the cynicism of old soldiers. In the quiet valley below Walker's Ridge, some of their officers had spoken gravely to them of their high duty in the tests they were about to face. These fine troops had made a deep impression upon all who saw them, and brigadiers, anxious to relieve or support their tired troops, looked eagerly towards the new Australians. Initially, the brigade was allocated as a reserve for Major General Godley's New Zealand and Australia Division. However, within days, elements participated in the attacks on Hill 60 between the 22nd and 29th of August, earning the first of the brigade's 20 battle honours. Godley, realising that they were entirely inexperienced and desiring to employ the brigade later as a whole, didn't wish to allow it to be drawn into the battle then underway at the end of the August offensive to capture Hill 60, and endeavour to secure the left flank of the Anzac position and support the new British position at Suvla. However, the original assault on the 21st of August ground to a bloody halt that night, and Godley was persuaded by his brigadiers to inject the fresh 18th Battalion, which was then committed to a direct assault on Hill 60 from the west. The lead company stepping off at 0500 on the 22nd of August to a plan which can only be described as suboptimal, with orders to use only bombs and bayonets when they had not been issued with bombs, succeeded in capturing the first line of Turkish trenches, but were decimated by a counter-attack. The following companies were cut down, crossing the open ground. Within a few hours, the 18th Battalion, which commenced at 750 strong, had lost 11 officers and 372 other ranks, of whom half had been killed. The 19th Battalion was moved to reinforce the 10th Gurkhas and fill a dangerous gap, digging a trench about 100 yards in front of the enemy position. Lieutenant Frank Boyden, the platoon commander in Charlie Company, wrote, "When we left the Gurkhas, one of the Imperial staff officers commended us on the good work we had done, saying that had we been an army of trained regulars, we couldn't have done better." And that is how the 5th Brigade made their name. The Gurkhas themselves think a lot of the Australians and even say it is an honour to fight alongside of them. During that 3 days battle, we never took part in the charge, but I honestly think our work was just as trying, for we worked with our blood cool, while those in the charge have their blood up and plenty of excitement to carry them through. Yet another attack on Hill 60 was launched on the 27th of August, to which the remnants of the 18th Battalion and also the 17th Battalion were committed. Described by Bean as one of the most difficult fights in which Australian troops were ever engaged, there was no effective bombardment on the Australian objectives, and the first assault line was swept away by machine gun fire. Some of the 17th Battalion reached and occupied a small section of Turkish trench, but were withdrawn. Eventually, a much better planned attack on the 29th of August, including the 18th Battalion, gained more limited objectives and then fought off ferocious counterattacks. By the end, the 18th Battalion could muster only 386. The commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Chapman, completely overwhelmed by the losses, the events and the sickness, resigned on the spot and was evacuated. Of Hill 60, one historian has written, "The connoisseurs of military futility, valour, incompetence and determination, the attacks on Hill 60 are in a class of their own." After the August offensive failed to break the deadlock, the 5th Brigade settled into defensive routine in the trenches. On the 28th of August, the brigade took over the trenches facing the neck from the 3rd Light Horse Brigade. Holmes, now a temporary brigadier, soon assumed responsibility for Russell's Top and the head of Monash Valley. This slide shows the rear of his headquarters. For a short period, part of the 17th Battalion garrisoned Pope's Hill, but mostly it was responsible for the defence of Quinn's Post, one of the most contested positions along the entire front, for which it assumed responsibility in September. The much weakened 18th Battalion was in reserve, behind the brigade's positions between Walker's Ridge and Quinn's Post. It was primarily responsible for holding Corkins Post. From mid-December, the 19th Battalion was responsible for the defence of Pope's Hill. The 20th Battalion, which escaped the fate of the others at Hill 60, was responsible from 26 August for the defence of Russell's Top. It was Holmes' habit regularly to visit every key part of his lines. When the Divisional Commander General Legg became ill in November, Holmes took acting command of the 2nd Division. The brigade withdrew from Gallipoli on the 19th and 20th of December. Captain Cecil Lucas of the 17th Battalion, a Sydney barrister, was in charge of the last party to leave Quinn's Post on the morning of the 20th of December. Following the evacuation from the peninsula in December, the brigade returned to Egypt, where in early 1916 the AIF was expanded and reorganised. The 1st Division and 4th Infantry Brigade and their battalions were divided into halves, which were brought up to strength with reinforcements from Australia to form the 4th and 5th Divisions. The 2nd Division was retained intact, and with the 1st, formed into one Anzac Corps under the command of General Birdwood. In Egypt, the 2nd Division completed its training and garrisoned the Suez Canal before leading the move of the AIF to France. The 5th Brigade departed Alexandria for Marseille on the 23rd of March 1916. In April, it was sent with the rest of one Anzac to a relatively quiet sector south of Armentières to acclimatise to the Western Front, entering the front line on the 7th of April. In preparation for the planned Battle of the Somme, raids were performed on the enemy lines. On the night of 25 to 26 June at Brereton, one such raid was conducted by a party of 9 officers and 73 other ranks of the 17th Battalion, including Private William Jackson. Led by Major RJA Travers, the raid killed 30 enemy and captured 4. On returning, several members were wounded by shell fire in no man's land. Private Jackson returned safely, and after handing over a prisoner, immediately went back out under very heavy shell fire to bring in a wounded man. Then he went out again and was bringing in another when a shell blew off his arm. After returning to the trenches and obtaining assistance, he went out yet again to find 2 wounded comrades and succeeded in escorting one of them to safety. For this most conspicuous bravery, he received the 5th Brigade's First Victoria Cross. The 5th Brigade's first major battle on the Western Front was between 25 July and 5 August at Pozières. The village of Pozières was first attacked by the 1st Australian Division on the 23rd of July. It sustained heavy casualties and was replaced by the 2nd Division on the 27th of July. The 17th Battalion took heavy casualties in a wild bomb fight at Munster Island. The 2nd Division attacked on 29 July, with the 5th Brigade as the right forward brigade. Due to the hurried preparations, the troops forming up for the attack were detected, the supporting artillery proved inadequate, leaving large segments of wire in front of the German positions intact. The division sustained approximately 3,500 casualties for little gain. The 5th Brigade suffered most. After several days of disrupted but careful preparations, the 2nd Division attacked again on the evening of the 4th of August, again with the 5th Brigade as the right forward brigade. This time, the detailed and careful preparations resulted in the attack succeeding, capturing the old German 2 trench line and part of the crest. The Germans counter-attacked the following day, which the Australians repulsed. This was followed by a severe sustained artillery bombardment that inflicted heavy casualties. After 12 days on the front line and sustaining 6,846 casualties, the 2nd Division was relieved by the 4th Division on the 6th of August. Between 18 and 28 August, after a brief respite, the brigade returned to the Pozières trenches, this time in a reserve role. The 2nd Division relieved the 1st Division in front of Moquet Farm beyond Pozières on the 22nd of August, and on 26 August succeeded in penetrating past the fortifications at Moquet Farm, but were forced back by counterattacks. After sustaining another 1,268 casualties, the 2nd Division was relieved on the 26th of August. On 5 September, 1 Anzac was withdrawn from the Somme and sent to Ypres in Belgium for rest. But in October they were sent to occupy a sector south of Pozières near the village of Fleurs. After the 7th Brigade were ejected from trenches they'd captured a few days earlier on the 5th of November in a German complex called the Maze, the 19th Battalion, supported by the 20th Battalion and 2 battalions of the 7th Brigade, were engaged between 14 and 16 November in an attack in heavy mud, in conditions that have been described as the worst ever encountered by the AIF. They were partially successful in capturing parts of the Gerd and Gerd support trenches immediately to the north of the Maze, but a German counter-attack on the 16th of November retook all the trenches that had been captured by the 2nd Division, which had sustained 1,720 casualties in the 2 attacks. Eventually in November 1916, the Battle of the Somme came to an end. It was followed by an exceedingly bitter winter. Holmes, who had returned to the 5th Brigade after the evacuation of Anzac, led the brigade in the attacks on the Pozieres Heights in August and at Fleurs in October. In January 1917, he was given command of the 4th Division. As he had at Gallipoli, Holmes continued personally to reconnoitre every part of his line, and on 31 March 1917 was sniped at but not hit by his aide Watts. Holmes commanded his division at Bullecourt in April, where he opposed the operation that ultimately caused his division very heavy losses, and at Messines in June with a better result. On the 2nd of July 1917, he escorted the Premier of New South Wales, William Holman, to survey the Messines battlefield. Setting out on foot, a German heavy salvo landed nearby and Holmes was hit through the chest and lung. He died at a nearby aid post, the most senior Australian officer killed in action on the Western Front. As Commander 5th Brigade, Holmes was succeeded by Robert Smith, who was promoted Colonel and temporary Brigadier General and took command on the 1st of January 1917. Smith was born in Richmond, Melbourne, the son of a tanner and a wool merchant. He was educated at Scotch College before joining his father in a wool scouring business in Geelong. He served in the 5th Infantry Regiment, the Victorian Scottish, as a private, in the ranks for 3 years before he was commissioned in 1910. Promoted to captain in the 60th Infantry Battalion, which the 5th had been redesignated in 1913, and major just before the outbreak of war on the 1st of August 1914. He was appointed to the AIF in March 1915 as second in command of the new 22nd Infantry Battalion in the 6th Brigade with the rank of major. He served at Gallipoli from August 1915, where his battalion took over the trenches at Lone Pine. On 24 February 1916, back in Egypt, he was promoted Lieutenant Colonel and given command of the battalion. For his part in the fighting at Pozieres, particularly the battalion's successful attack on the old German trenches on 4 August 1916, Smith was mentioned in dispatches and awarded the Distinguished Service Order. Bean described Smith as a tall, bluff, rubicund Victorian, brave, stubborn to a degree that seemingly approached hardness, level-headed with the slow, somewhat cynical speech and assurance of many Australian businessmen, abhorring any show of sentiment, idealism, or of such enthusiasm as glowed in the heart of his genial predecessor. That portrait of him seems to capture some of that. His influence on the brigade over the ensuing 2 years would be profound. In early 1917, the Germans appreciated that the Allies were planning a coordinated offensive, and alarmed at the re-entrant that had been driven in their lines at the Somme, withdrew to the strongly fortified prepared defences of the Hindenburg Line. The Allies followed up. Elements of the 2nd Division engaged the German rear guard as it fell back to the 1st Fortified Reserve position, known as the Lupart-Lee Transloy Line, or to the Germans as the R1 Stellung, centred on the village of Bapaume. The 5th Brigade was engaged in the follow-up, including heavy fighting at Warlencourt in February and March 1917. On 25 February, the 5th and 6th Brigades mounted an unsuccessful attack on the Malt Trench, an outpost in front of the R1 position. There were further small attacks on the Malt Trench through 26 and 27 February, and a larger one on the 27th and 28th by the 7th Brigade. However, the wire defences were undamaged and little headway could be made until the 2nd of March, when a combined attack by the 5th and 7th Brigades, after sustained artillery fire had cut through the wire, resulted in the capture of portions of the Malt Trench, bringing the 2nd Division close enough to be able to attack the R1 position. However, as the 2nd Division was preparing to attack the R1 position on 13 March, it was discovered on 12 March that the Germans had already withdrawn to the 2nd Reserve position, R2, centred on the crest of the ridge beyond Bapaume. Then, R2 was evacuated also on the 17th of March as the Germans withdrew to the Hindenburg Line. And here we see the band of the 5th Brigade marching not along Macquarie Street, Sydney, but through Bapaume. The village of Lagnacourt, a fortified village which had been captured by the 4th Brigade on the 11th of April, was defended by the 5th Brigade on the 15th of April when the Germans launched a major counter-attack, employing 23 battalions against the 4 Australian battalions in the front line. Smith, at his headquarters in the ruined house in Naroi, was informed early of the exact point of German penetration and watched the German advance from Lagnacourt towards Naroi from the window of his headquarters, directing the efforts of the 17th and 19th battalions, along with cooks, backmen and signallers from headquarters, to halt it, taking measures that were level-headed and appropriate, employing his reserve battalions, the 19th and the 20th, to contain the German advance. Smith personally directed under fire a spirited counter-attack. His battalions pushed the Germans back for more than 2 miles and took over 250 prisoners. For his role in the defeat of the German counter-attack at Lagnacourt, Smith was awarded a bar to his Distinguished Service Order. Bean wrote that he had won great credit by his cool judgment during the German counterstroke against Lagnacourt. 1 Anzac Corps were now within striking distance of the main Hindenburg Line defences. The brigade took part in 3 more major battles before the year was out. 2nd Bullecourt on the 3rd and 4th of May in France, and Menin Road on the 22nd of September, and Pearl Capelle 9th and 10th of October in Belgium. The 2nd Battle of Bullecourt commenced on the 3rd of May 1917, with the 5th and 6th Brigades attacking the 2 trench lines each of Bullecourt. The 5th Brigade performed poorly, made little progress. Some elements lost direction, others moved too fast and ran up against their own barrage and found that the wire had not been cut. Momentum was lost, waves became mixed, leaders trying to sort out the confusion were picked off by snipers. Someone gave an order to withdraw, which spread, although some reached the 2nd trench. Smith did not escape criticism. By keeping his headquarters in Naroi, he was too far back and lost control of events. It was also said that he failed to make full use of the firepower available, underestimated the danger of enemy machine guns which enfiladed his brigade from Bullecourt on the left and Queant on the right, neglected the danger of uncut wire, and did not arrange adequate flank protection. But he received little assistance from 2nd Division or from 1 Corps. The Australians then moved to Flanders for reorganisation and training, in preparation for the 3rd Battle of Ypres. On the 20th of September, in the Battle of Menin Road, the 2nd Division with the 5th Brigade on the left and the 7th on the right, in an attack involving 10 other divisions on an 8-mile front, drove the German line back 1,000 yards, but at a cost of 2,259 casualties. On the 4th of October, the brigade was involved in the Battle of Brereton, in which the 2nd Division's task was to advance 1,800 yards and capture one of the ridge lines which dominated the Ypres salient. As the division was forming up for its attack, a heavy German bombardment on the assembly area caused heavy casualties. The Germans launched an attack at almost the same time, resulting in the 2 attacking forces engaging each other in a scrap in no man's land. After gaining the upper hand, the 2nd Division captured all of its objectives, but at a cost of 2,174 casualties. This battle was the peak of British success during 3rd Ypres. With rain starting to fall on the 3rd of October, it was the last successful action of the battle. With the rain becoming heavier, the conditions on the ground deteriorated. When the Battle of Pearl Capelle commenced on the 9th of October, the ground was difficult to traverse, resulting in difficulty bringing artillery and ammunition forward. The companies were now at about 1/4 strength. The troops were exhausted, merely moving up through the mud to their starting positions. Yet still at 05:20, after an inadequate bombardment, the 17th and 20th battalions attacked, capturing a large number of Germans and several machine guns, and reaching their first and some subsequent objectives. Casualties among the officers were high. The 17th Battalion lost 12 officers and 177 men, which was about 2/3 of its then effective strength. That battalion later acknowledged that in this action, perhaps more than in any other, the work of the non-commissioned officers stood out. When most of the officers were casualties, these men calmly took command, and by their coolness and soldierly initiative, both encouraged and inspired their men. Having obtained their objectives, the two battalions were isolated and under strength. German counterattacks eliminated post after post. When the situation became known, the 18th and 19th battalions were sent forward and a line formed along the first objective. With the troops exhausted, the 2nd Division was fortunately relieved before the final terrible effort around Passchendaele on the 12th of October. The collapse of Russian resistance on the Eastern Front enabled the Germans in early 1918 to transfer many troops to the Western Front. On the 21st of March, they launched their spring offensive focused on the Somme. With the Germans making rapid gains, the Australians, including the 5th Brigade, were moved south from Belgium, where they'd spent the winter, to be thrown into the line to help repel the attack around Brereton, the loss of which would imperil the strategically important rail hub at Amiens and restore the line. Upon reaching the Somme on the 4th of April, the 5th Brigade was detached to relieve the troops around Brereton, where it was sent to support and later relieve the British 18th Division. Having relieved the 18th Division on the 5th of April, it was decided that the 5th should recapture Hangard Wood and so reduce the salient that threatens the Sutherland flank of the Australian forces at Brereton. The 19th and 20th Battalions attacked on the 7th of April. Intelligence had reported that the wood was lightly held. Curiously, it wasn't. Here, Lieutenant Percival Valentine Storkey of the 19th Battalion would earn the Victoria Cross for most conspicuous bravery, leadership and devotion to duty. Storkey, who originated from New Zealand, where he'd served in the Wellington Regiment, came to Sydney in 1911. In 1912, he joined the administrative staff of the University of Sydney, and the following year enrolled as a law student. He enlisted in the AIF as a private in May 1915. In September, he was commissioned second lieutenant. He embarked for England in December with the 7th Reinforcements of the 19th Battalion and joined the battalion in France on the 14th of November 1916. 5 days later, he was wounded in the attack on Gers trenches south of Flers. Promoted lieutenant in January 1917, he was again wounded on the 10th of October during the 3rd Battle of Ypres. At Hangard Wood on the 7th of April 1918, the lead company of the 19th, whose men were tired, lay down in the FUP at dawn. Some of them, including Storkey, who was second in command, fell asleep, and the company stepped off without him. It had advanced about 75 metres when he woke. He caught up with his men only to encounter heavy machine gun fire, which had already struck a quarter of them, even before the company reached the edge of the wood. The company commander was shot in both knees and Storkey took over, leading 6 men through head-high saplings to outflank the machine gun position. When they broke into a clearing behind the trenches, from where the Germans were firing at the rest of the company, one of the Australians yelled upon seeing the enemy, some of whom looked around and saw Storkey's party. Storkey instantly led the charge, engaging the nearest Germans before they could fully react. His party killed or wounded 30, and the survivors surrendered. There were more than 50 of them. Storkey's confident and determined leadership had created the impression of a much larger force than the handful visible to the Germans, which in fact were all that there were. Storkey was later again wounded in action and promoted captain in May 1918. After the war, he completed his interrupted legal studies, was admitted to the bar, became a Crown prosecutor, and in 1939 a District Court judge, the only Australian Victoria Cross recipient to become a judge. The attack succeeded in clearing Hangard Wood at a cost of 151 casualties, but the position that the attacking troops were expected to occupy was poorly sighted, and as a result, they withdrew to the positions from which they had begun. The action at Hangard Wood, in which the brigade fought with great spirit, was the last of the 5th Brigade's operations to be commanded by Smith. On the 3rd of May, he was evacuated sick with septic ulcer and had to relinquish his command. In August, shortly after his award of a Belgian Croix de Guerre had been gazetted, he embarked for Australia. He'd been made a Companion of St Michael and St George in the 1918 New Year's list and mentioned in dispatches a 4th time on the 7th of April 1918. After the war, he commanded militia brigades and was aide-de-camp to the Governor-General. A keen supporter of the Geelong Football Club, he had a stroke while watching a match on the 14th of July 1928 and died that evening. In command of the 5th Brigade, he was succeeded by Edward Fowle Martin. Martin was born at Launceston, Tasmania, the son of a pastoralist. The family moved to New South Wales, where he was educated at King's College, Goulburn. He worked as an accountant in a bank before joining a wool-breaking firm. He joined the Army Service Corps as a private in 1898, was commissioned in 1903, promoted Major on the 1st of August 1913. On the 18th of August 1914, he joined the ANNMEF with the rank of Major, sailing for New Guinea the very next day. We can't achieve that in today's system. On the 14th of September 1914, Martin led the advance on Toma, where the German governor had established his headquarters. After the Germans' surrender, he landed at Madang with a half company of infantry and a half company of naval reservists for a garrison and took charge there. In December, he accompanied an expedition down the Sepik River. He was district administrator until February 1915 when he returned to Australia. His ANNMEF appointment was terminated on the 4th of March, and on the 7th of May, he was appointed to the AIF with the rank of Major in the 17th Battalion. He became second in command of the battalion on the 2nd of June 1915. He was evacuated to Egypt with dysentery on the 13th of September, but returned to Gallipoli on the 18th of December in time for the evacuation a week or so later. On the 19th of April 1916, he was appointed to command the 17th Battalion with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. For the performance of his battalion at Pozieres, he was mentioned in dispatches and awarded the Distinguished Service Order. After being evacuated with flu on the 23rd of December 1916, he returned to the 17th Battalion on the 17th of February 1917. At Lagnacourt in April 1917, of which we've spoken, his headquarters was caught up in the fighting. At Menin Road on the 20th of September 1917, he moved his headquarters into a shell hole in the front line in order to better supervise the defence effort. He was mentioned in the dispatches twice more in 1917 and made a Companion of St Michael and St George in the 1918 New Year's list. After 2 years in temporary command of the 7th Brigade, he assumed command of the 5th Brigade on the 3rd of May. On the 28th of June, he became temporary Brigadier General. All the Australian Brigadier General appointments were temporary, with the substantive rank of Colonel. He was promoted substantive Colonel on 9 July 1918. Following the brilliant success of the Australian Corps in capturing Hamel in 93 minutes on the 4th of July, battalions of the 5th Brigade commenced to relieve those in the assault force. On the 6th of July, Corporal Walter Ernest Brown was a member of a small advance party from the 20th Battalion, which went forward to the 21st Battalion to prepare for the relief in place to occur next morning. Brown, born in Tasmania, had moved to New South Wales in 1911 and was a grocer at Petersham when he enlisted on the 26th of July 1915. Although originally enlisting in the infantry, he transferred to the Light Horse to get into action more quickly, he thought. but then again determined to join the infantry on the Western Front and secure the transfer to the 20th Battalion, which he eventually joined on the 8th of August 1917. He distinguished himself at Passchendaele, receiving a DCM for most self-sacrificing devotion to duty, attending to the wounded of his company under heavy shell fire, and later taking charge of his section after the sergeant became a casualty and showing a fine example of courage and leadership. He was promoted Lance Corporal in October, wounded in November, and promoted Corporal in April 1918. On the 6th of July, he was exploring a trench when an outgoing sergeant told him that snipers were being troublesome from a nearby position. 70 yards across the open, he saw a mound which he supposed to be that position. Leaving his rifle, but taking 2 Mills bombs, he ran towards it, hearing occasional shots. He threw one bomb. The place remained without sound or movement. He ran to the mound and found a trench with a machine gun standing on the parapets. He jumped into the trench and struck a German who ran at him. The German fell back. Brown reversed to the machine gun, holding his only remaining bomb ready to throw, but turned to see more Germans emerging from a dugout at the other end of the trench. Without a rifle, unable to throw the bomb because he would have been left defenceless, he held the bomb threateningly. They surrendered. He took 13 prisoners, including an officer, and escorted them back to the Australian lines, Mills bomb in hand. For this most conspicuous bravery, he received the Victoria Cross. After the spring offensive had been repelled, in August the Allies were able to launch their own offensive, which became known as the 100 Days Offensive and ultimately brought an end to the war. The 5th Brigade was involved in the battles of Amiens on 8 August, the celebrated attack on Mons and Quentin on the 31st of August, and the forcing of the Beaurevoir line, the 3rd and final fortified line of the Hindenburg line, around Montbrehen on 3rd of October. The Battle of Amiens commenced on the 8th of August. The first phase saw the 2nd Division attack with the 3rd Division from its position near Brereton. The 17th and 18th Battalions passed either side of War Fusée, the remnants of which are depicted in this slide, with the inner companies entering the village and bombing cellars and routing enemy headquarters out of dugouts. The 18th Battalion found 2 entire field artillery batteries abandoned. The 5th Brigade took many prisoners in its sector. The 5th Division, as they passed through to take up phase 2, observed that the 2nd Division was encumbered with rather more prisoners than they knew what to do with. The division reached its objective, called the Green Line, between 6:25 and 7 a.m. and dug in. The second wave of the 4th and 5th Divisions moved through the 2nd and 3rd Divisions at 8:20 and continued to the Red Line. Between 9 and 11 August, the division continued to advance from Harbonnières towards Lyon. On the 9th and 10th of August, the 5th Brigade, 17th and 18th Battalions leading, advanced to Frameville. On the 11th of August, the 19th and 20th Battalions moved through to attack and capture Rancourt. After a short rest on the 26th of August, the 2nd Division, relieving the 1st Division, advanced along the south bank of the Somme River, capturing several villages. With German morale declining, the division was ordered to advance towards Patron and Mons and Quentin, with the intention of capturing Mons and Quentin, which dominated the surrounding terrain and was heavily fortified. Although the initial plan was for the 2nd Division, along with the 3rd and British 32nd Divisions, to attack to the east and cross the Somme River near Perron, before the 2nd Division would continue on to take Mons and Quentin, it was ascertained that the defences along the river were too strong. So instead, the 2nd Division's front was taken over by the 5th Division, and the 2nd moved north, behind the 3rd, which was to secure the 2nd's flank, approaching Mons and Quentin on the northern side of the Somme River, before attacking it from the west. In what would be described by the Army Commander General Rawlinson as a magnificent performance, the 5th Brigade, down to 1,340 men, supported by field artillery and heavy artillery, took Mons and Quentin by storm on the morning of the 31st of August, capturing over 700 prisoners. The brigade then incurred multiple counterattacks, and eventually on the afternoon of the 31st was pushed off the summit by one of them, but managed to retain a position just below the summit, which was then retaken by the 6th Brigade on the morning of the 1st of September. The capture of Mons and Quentin unhinged the German defences and forced the general withdrawal back to the Hindenburg Line. It was widely regarded as the finest feat of arms of the war. By the 4th of September, the 2nd Division was relieved by the 3rd Division for the pursuit beyond Patron, and the brigade began a rest period that lasted until late September. During this time, on the 23rd of September, it was decided to reduce the brigades to 3 battalions, and the 19th was ordered to disband to reinforce the others. The troops, wishing to maintain their battalion identities, refused to obey, and the 19th Battalion and the others which had been ordered to disband remained in being until October. By early October, the main Hindenburg defences and the supporting defences had been captured, leaving only the 3rd line, the WWI line. On the 3rd of October 1918, the 2nd Division attacked the WWI line with the 5th and 7th Brigades, totalling 2,500 men on a frontage of 6,000 yards. The objective involved a 2-mile advance from the starting position at Estrées. Attacking before sunrise, the assaulting brigades captured fortified positions at the Lamont Farm and Mushroom Quarry at a cost of 989 casualties, but were stopped short of their final objective, the village of Brereton. Joseph Maxwell was born at Forest Lodge when he enlisted in the AIF on 5 February 1915 as a boilermaker at Hexham near Newcastle. He was posted to the 18th Battalion and served at Gallipoli. When the battalion moved to France in 1916, Maxwell, a chunky, short man, revelled in fierce barroom scraps behind the lines. In 1917, while attending officer training school, he was involved in London in a brawl with civil and military police, fined and returned to his unit, yet was still promoted warrant officer class 2. He received the Distinguished Conduct Medal for his conduct on 20th September 1917 in 3rd grade, when he took command of a platoon whose officer had been killed and led it with great dash. He was appointed 2nd Lieutenant in September 1917 and Lieutenant on the 1st of January 1918. He received the Military Cross for his actions in March 1918 and a Bardurate for the attack at Raincourt on 9 August, when all the other officers being casualties. He assumed command of the company, ensured it crossed the start line on H hour despite heavy fire, and when their supporting tank received a direct hit from a 77mm shell, leapt onto the tank, opened the hatch, allowed the crew to escape just before it was engulfed in flames, assisted the crew commander back, then returned to the attack, pressed the attack and took the objective. In a pattern that's now becoming familiar, I don't think he wanted to be Maxwell's company commander. On the 3rd of October, his company commander was wounded early, and again Maxwell took charge. Under heavy fire, he pushed forward along to cut through strong wire and capture the most dangerous machine gun, killing 3 and capturing 4 enemy on his own, enabling the company to penetrate and reach the objective. He then pushed forward again and single-handedly silenced a gun which was holding up a flanking company. Subsequently, with only 2 others, he attempted to capture a strong enemy party. He had heard that they wanted to surrender. He and his comrades found himself surrounded and would themselves have been captured, but escaped due to his resourcefulness. For these actions, he was awarded the Victoria Cross. In a foreword to a book later written by Maxwell, his commanding officer wrote, "In these pages, he has openly confessed that he was more than a handful behind the line. In the presence of the enemy, however, he became a different personage. Resuming the attack on the 4th of October, the 2nd Division approached the village of WWI and conducted further attacks the next day to capture Brereton. After much hard fighting by 2 battalions of the 6th Brigade, the village was captured along with nearly 400 German prisoners at the cost of another 430 casualties. This drove a mile-long salient into the German lines and was described by Bean as one of the most brilliant actions of the Australian infantry in the First World War. After this, the units of the Australian Corps, severely depleted due to heavy casualties and limited reinforcements, were withdrawn from the line upon the insistence of Prime Minister Billy Hughes for rest and reorganisation. 2nd Division was relieved on the evening of the 5th of October with the intention of allowing it to rest until the start of the campaigning season in 1919. The casualties of 1918, compared with long-term leave for 1914 enlistees and dwindling new enlistments, had sapped the strength of the AIF. On the 18th of October 1918, the 19th Battalion was disbanded to reinforce the other battalions. As it turned out, the 5th Brigade would fight no more battles. It was training out of the line when the armistice was declared on the 11th of November 1918. Most of the brigade was repatriated in February 1919. For his part in the fighting, Martin was mentioned in dispatches on an additional 3 occasions and was made a commander of the Bath on the 3rd of June 1919. He returned to Sydney on 26 August 1919, and his appointment to the AIF was terminated on 8 December. In 1924, he moved to Perth, where he became an accountant with the Western Australian newspapers. In 1932, he was appointed Sergeant-at-Arms of the Western Australian Legislative Assembly, where he carried the mace for the next 18 years. During the Second World War, he helped organise the Volunteer Defence Corps in Perth. He died on the 22nd of September 1950. The battalions of the 5th Brigade received 20 battle honours: Suvla, Gallipoli 1915, Egypt 1915-16, Pozieres, Bapaume 1917, Bulcourt, Ypres 1917, Menin Road, Polygon Wood, Roots End, Coltapel, Passchendaele, Hamel, Galliens, Albert 1918, Monson Quentin, Hindenburg Line, Beaurevoir, France and Flanders 1916-18, and Somme 1916-18. Around 4,000 members of the brigade gave their lives, 10,000 were wounded. As we've seen, 4 members of the brigade, one from each of its 4 infantry battalions, received the Victoria Cross. After the war, the 5th Brigade was disbanded, but in 1921, Australia's part-time military forces were reorganised to replicate the structure of the AIF, and the territorial battalions inherited the battle honours of their AIF predecessors. The 5th Brigade was re-raised as part of the Citizens Military Force, based in New South Wales and headquartered in Sydney. In December 1941, it was mobilised for full-time service and undertook defensive duties in New South Wales and Western Australia. In January 1944, the brigade trained in Queensland for operations in New Guinea, but that did not eventuate, and it was again disbanded in June 1944. When the CMF was re-established in 1948, the 5th Brigade was re-raised as part of the 2nd Division. In 1960, it ceased to exist under the pantropic structure, but when that experiment was abandoned in 1965, the brigade was reformed, initially as 5th Task Force, but reverting in 1982 to the nomenclature of 5th Brigade. Today's 5th Brigade is a reserve formation based in New South Wales, assigned to the 2nd Division, and headquartered at Holsworthy, where it was first raised more than a century ago. In the headquarters, Portraits of Holmes, Smith and Martin hold pride of place at the head of the gallery of the later lesser luminaries who succeeded them. A major brigade exercise in 1990 was called Martin Revisited, after Brigadier General Martin. The brigade's current units include the 2nd 17th and 1st 19th Battalions of the Royal New South Wales Regiment, the lineal successors of the 17th, 18th, 19th and 20th Battalions of the 1st AIF. Their colours bear the battle honours earned by their great war ancestors.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your address this morning. Just another reminder that during morning tea, the authors will be at the desk. You can purchase the book. We're at a discounted price. We've been allowed for that to happen by the publishers. You can either pay by cash or electronic means. I'll ask the committee members if they can bring morning tea out, please, from the fridges. They can do that.